Hi, I am Aurel Enriquez, and this presentation contains our discussion on the muscular system. This slide enumerates to us the three different types of muscles and kung saan natin sila pwedeng makita. Skeletal muscles are attached to bones and are voluntarily controlled. Voluntarily meaning they will only move with our conscious decision and effort. So, kaya nating kontrolin yung mga skeletal muscles natin however we want them to move as long as it's within the capability of our joints and ligaments. Next are cardiac muscles. Sa heart lang sila makikita and they are involuntarily controlled. So basically, they would move on their own even if we don't consciously think about it. Diba? So, when your legs are tired, pwede kang magdesisyon na tumigil muna sa pagtakbo or paglalakad, di ba po? That's an example of voluntary decision. But when your heart is beating super fast from doing exercise or maybe from social anxiety, you can't just think, okay, wait lang, babagalan ko muna yung heartbeats ko. That's not possible, di ba po? So you can't do that. So the best thing that you can do is either sit down, take a rest, and then eventually your heart will also slow down. So that's what we mean when we say cardiac muscles are involuntary. We don't have direct control between the movement or for the movement of cardiac muscles. Third are smooth muscles. So we could find them along blood vessels and within the walls of hollow organs like the stomach or the bladder. So smooth muscles are also involuntary. So they will move when necessary, whether we think about it or not. Another observation that we could make between these is that skeletal muscles are striated. So, upon microscopic examination, makikita natin na meron silang mga lines or mga guhit-guhit that makes them look like they have stripes. Cardiac muscles are the same. Cardiac muscles are also striated. So, meron din sila ng mga lines or stripes na makikita natin upon microscopic examination. Smooth muscles, these ones are different. Sila po yung naiiba. They are non-striated. So they don't have those lines or stripes even if we look at them through microscopic examination. This slide lists down all the functions of the muscular system. First up is movement, which again is possible in collaboration with the skeletal system. Next is to maintain posture. So we need to understand that although yung skeletal system, yung framework, although the skeletal system is the framework of the body, this framework would not be able to stand up or to support itself if our muscles weren't doing their job. So muscle cells, they could also undergo cellular respiration or the movement of oxygen and carbon dioxide in and out of the cells. Next, production of body heat. This is something that we've mentioned from time to time in our past discussions, di ba po? So as we constantly move our muscles, heat is eventually produced. Number 5, constriction of organs and vessels. Trabaho po yan ng mga smooth muscles. And number 6, contraction. Contraction of the heart. Trabaho po yan ng cardiac muscles. More on definition of terms, let's look into the functional properties of muscles. Ngayon na alam na natin yung functions ng muscle cells, anong mga kaya nilang gawin to fulfill those functions, let's now look into the simplified meaning of their functional properties. First up is contractility. So this is the ability to shorten with force. Parang kabaliktaran naman po nito yung extensibility, all right? So extensibility, this is when the muscle can be stretched longer than its usual length, or as it says here, longer than its normal resting length. Next, elasticity. This is the ability to return or recoil into its original length. And excitability naman po, this is the capability of the muscle to respond to stimulus. Alright? So, ayun po, dito ang mahalaga lang naman kailangan nating tandaan is yung mga key terms or key words for us to kind of like understand kung anong meaning ng mga words na ito. So contractility, this is to shorten. Extensibility, this is to stretch. Next is elasticity, this is to recoil or return to original shape or original length. And next is excitability, which is the capability to respond. Next, here are some facts about our skeletal muscles. Our skeletal muscles make up approximately 40% of our total body weight. Meanwhile, our bones only contribute approximately 14% of our total body weight, and even our fat tissues contribute more or less than 15% of our total body weight. So, ayun po, different studies and different sources online may say different numbers though. So, yung mga nabanggit ko po ay approximation lang, and this may vary from person to person. But ayun po, for this discussion, let's remember approximately 40% of our total body weight is actually made up of our skeletal muscles. Next bullet tells us kung bakit daw po skeletal muscles ang tawag sa skeletal muscles, and it's just because they're attached to the skeletal system. So there is literally no deeper explanation for that. It's just that the skeletal muscles are directly attached to the skeletal system. Next, skeletal muscles are also called striated muscles because they have these lines or striations that we may be able to see upon microscopic examination. Next, it also says here that a muscle is composed of not just muscle cells, but also nerves and connective tissues. So, itong tatlo po kapag pinagsama-sama natin, then we could now call this one complete organ. Okay, isang kompletong organ na daw po ang isang muscle if it also has nerves and connective tissues, which makes sense, no? Because structurally, meron na siyang isa sa mga bagay na kailangan to fulfill its functions. Next slide talks about the coverings of muscles. So each one fully functional muscle is covered by an epimysium, which is also a connective tissue. So may mga groupings din daw po yung mga muscles. So each group is called a fascicle, and each of those fascicle is surrounded by a perimysium. Next, each individual muscle cell naman po has its own covering, and this one would be referred to as the endomysium. So again, yung outermost covering ng lahat ng muscles is referred to as the epimysium. Bawat group of muscles is also covered by a connective tissue referred to as a perimysium, and then bawat isang cell daw po is also covered by something that is called an endomysium. Okay, so ayan po, this slide right here shows us what it looks like if we were to look at an entire muscle or an entire organ that is being covered by the epimysium. And then right here we could see the different groups of muscles or bundles of muscles until eventually we see one individual muscle cell. Let's now talk about the mechanical components of muscles. So maliban po sa mga muscle cells, muscles in general are also composed of protein filaments, which we would call myofibrils. So these myofibrils, they are composed of myofilaments, which could either be actin or myosin. Okay, ulitin po natin ang mga myofibrils, they are composed of myofilaments. Alright, may dalawang klase ng myofilaments, actin and myosin. The thin ones, or yung mga manipis, they are called actin, and the ones that appear to be thicker are referred to as myosin. Okay, so ulitin po natin, actin are the thin filaments, and yung myosin, yun yung mga makapal na version ng myofilaments. Ang paulit-ulit or the alternating arrangement po ng mga actin and myosin are then referred to as sarcomeres. So itong mga actin and myosin daw po, these are the structures that are responsible for contractility. So again, if you remember, what is contractility? Yes, this is the capability of muscles to shorten. Let's now look further into the structure of a sarcomere. Sarcomeres are also known as the basic functional units of skeletal muscles. Okay, ulitin po natin. The basic functional units of skeletal muscles is ayan, sarcomeres. And again, what are sarcomeres made out of? Actin and myosin. So another term that we need to be familiar with are Z discs. So Z discs, to simplify ko ano ang mga Z discs, they are simply fibers that connect one myofilament to another. This slide tells us bakit po striated ang itsura ng mga skeletal muscles, alright? And it's because of the sarcomere. So the sarcomere has areas that are light staining and areas that are darkly staining. So after daw nating mag-apply ng stain, may mga segments or areas daw po na hindi masyadong kinakapitan ng stain. But there are areas na maraming stain yung nag-a-accumulate sa places na yun. May iba rin daw pong tawag sa mga bands or lines na yon. Ang kailangan lang po natin tandaan dito is that the lines or the light ones, the light bands no, are made up of actin, and now we would call them as the I bands. Tapos yung mga dark lines naman po, they are made up of myosin, and we would refer to them as A bands. Let's now look into the structure of myofilaments. Meron daw pong tatlong main character dito, which is actin, troponin, and tropomyosin. So here are their roles. Okay? So troponin bands would bind to calcium. Okay? So again, hindi lang po skeletal system natin or hindi lang yung bones natin yung gumagastos ng calcium. Our muscles also need calcium to function. Alright? Next, tropomyosin, these would block or close the myosin binding sites on the actin filaments. And initially, pinipigilan daw po no, ng tropomyosin na mag-bind yung myosin filaments with the actin filaments. Okay, ulitin natin. Troponin, it binds to calcium. Tropomyosin, it blocks the binding of myosin to the actin myofilament. Alright, so this slide just shows us the general appearance of all the structures that we've talked about. This illustration right here shows us what actin myofilaments would look like and what myosin filaments would look like. Next, we have a few definition of terms that has something to do with the connections between our nervous system and our muscular system. First up is the motor neuron. This is a nerve that stimulates a muscle. So ito daw po is isang parang component ng nervous system natin na kayang bigyan ng instructions, no, yung mga muscle cells natin. Next is the neuromuscular junction. This one is a synapse where a neuron would connect to a muscle fiber. So isang connection daw po ito or area kung saan ang isang cell ng nervous system natin could connect with a muscle fiber. Now, what do we mean when we say synapse? This is a general term that refers to cell-to-cell junctions or yung mga lugar kung saan nagduduktong ang bawat isang cell. And in this case, again, kapag sinabi nating neuromuscular junction, it's a synapse or a cell-to-cell junction between a neuron or a component of our nervous system and a muscle fiber. Next is the motor unit. This is a group of muscle fibers that a motor neuron would stimulate. So kapag sinabing motor unit, this is a group no, of muscle fibers or a collection of muscle fibers na kayang kontrolin ng mga motor neurons. This slide talks about the sliding filament model. So again, i-simplify natin no, yung mga explanations dito. When a muscle needs to contract, the actin and myosin filaments would slide past each other, making the sarcomere shorter. Kapag nag-shorten yung sarcomere, it also makes the muscles shorten, leading to contraction. So yun po yung simplified explanation on how our muscles are capable of contracting. Mag-i-slide past one another or in two different directions yung actin and myosin, making the muscle fibers shorter. This slide talks about how ATP contributes to muscle contractions. Yung energy daw po na kailangan ng muscles to be able to contract is supplied by adenosine triphosphate. So with that, no, ATP is then converted to adenosine diphosphate. And for the meantime, this energy produced is stored within the myosin fibers or myosin heads. Now, if you would remember from the previous slide, di ba, ang itsura po ng mga myosin filaments is they look like golf clubs kung saan pahaba yung structure nila tapos sa dulo may bulb shape na area. So, ayan po, sinasabi dito na yung energy daw po in the form of ATP is dun lang muna nakalagay or tinatago sa mga myosin heads. Now, when people die, wala na pong ATP that is available. So, wala na ring magbabind sa mga myosin filaments, making the muscles incapable of moving kasi nga wala na siyang source of energy. So, this event is known as rigor mortis. So, sa rigor mortis po, the muscles are now stiff and immovable. Let's talk about muscle fatigue. Muscle fatigue is a temporary reduced work capacity. So when our muscle cells are overworked, their structure could be damaged, hence affecting their capability to function. But then again, temporary lang naman po ito. So once the muscles would heal, the function is also regained. This slide talks about muscle soreness. This is usually observed after intense exercise or sports or any physical activity. So in Filipino, ito po yung feeling ng parang nangawit. Okay, so that's what we mean when we say muscle soreness. So this one is a combination of structural damage to the muscles plus the build-up of byproducts after constant ATP usage, which is why for people who work out, no, it is recommended na merong breaks or spaces in between each day of working out. So, ayun nga po, give the muscles time to repair or recover and also get rid of those byproducts of ATP usage. This slide talks about oxygen deficit. So, ito daw po yung time interval, no? Yung pagitan ng oras or lag time between exercising and breathing more because they're tired of exercising. Now, kapag sinabi naman nating excess post-exercise oxygen consumption, ito naman po yung kabaliktaran. So, ito yung time before bumalik sa normal breathing yung person after ng exercise. Let's now talk about smooth muscles. So they are non-striated. So wala daw po sila ng mga guhit-guhit or stripes na makikita natin under the microscope because their myofilaments or yung actin and myosin nila, they are not arranged in a line. So they don't form sarcomeres. So hindi tayo makakita ng mga lines or stripes na meron sa mga skeletal muscles. So again, smooth muscles are involuntary and they can be found on hollow organs and blood vessels. Next are cardiac muscles, which if you would remember from previous discussions, no, magkamukha sila ng mga skeletal muscles, di ba po? The difference is that cardiac muscles are branched and they only have one nucleus per cell. Ang mga skeletal muscles naman po, they don't have branches pero they could have multiple nuclei per cell. And another difference is that cardiac muscles could only be found in the heart or making up the heart. So striated din po ang cardiac muscles, yung actin and myosin nila are also arranged in lines that are called sarcomeres. And its contraction has been described to be autorhythmic. Alright, autorhythmic. So it is involuntary, but at the same time, this is producing a constant, steady rhythm unless a stimuli would trigger the heart to either speed up or slow down. Alright, so that's what we mean when we say autorhythmic. Involuntary, pero may steady na sinusunod na rhythm. Right. Next, this is also something that we've mentioned in previous discussions. No, each cardiac muscles are connected to one another by intercalated discs. So it is interesting to note that cardiac muscle cells function as a single unit, all right, or as a whole. So this is because of the action or movement of one cell, no? Ang movement ng isang cell could stimulate or encourage the movement of other cells that it is connected to. So, yung pagkilos daw po ng isang cell, it would encourage the movement of everybody else. So, para bagang pinipressure niya yung mga katabi niya na cells, no? But yeah, that's kind of the idea, no? The heart wouldn't be able to keep its organized, programmed rhythm if some parts are not moving in unison with the other parts, di ba po? So, kapag kumilos na yung isang heart muscle cell, tuloy-tuloy na may stimulate yung movement ng iba pang mga heart muscle cells. Again, each muscle cell or each cardiac muscle cell is connected to one another by intercalated discs. All right, this next slide talks about muscle anatomy or skeletal muscle anatomy. Okay, specifically yung ibang mga structures aside from the actual muscle cells. So first up are tendons. These are sheets of connective tissue that could connect the muscles to bones. If the tendons are broad and sheet-like, we would refer to them as aponeurosis. So yung mga aponeurosis daw po, parang tape yung itsura nila, no? Malapad and manipis, so broad and sheet-like. So again, these are the types of tendons that we would refer to as aponeurosis. Now, if a tendon is found specifically on the wrist and ankle, yun naman po ay tatawagin natin silang retinaculum. Next, kapag naman po sinabi nating origin, this is the part of the muscle that is attached to the area with the least movement. So, hindi daw po masyadong gumagalaw or na-out of place yung specific area na to kung saan nakaduktong yung muscle. But when we say insertion, this is where most of the movement could be observed. So, ito daw yung area kung saan nakadikit yung muscle, kung saan medyo mas matindi yung movement, no, na ginagawa ng muscle. So again, origin, the area where the muscle is attached with least mobility. Insertion, this is the area where the muscle is attached with the most mobility or movement. Muscles also have bellies or yung segment daw po na nasa gitna ng origin and the insertion. So we would refer to that as the belly of the muscle. Now, if a certain group of muscles work together and either they move in a similar direction or they create the same motion, then we would call them agonists. Pero kapag magkakontra naman daw po yung mga actions nila, no, then we would refer to them as antagonists. This slide shows us where we would usually find the origins and the insertions of muscles. So dito daw po sa area na to, sa mga origin, hindi masyadong kumikilos yung muscle. Pero yung area dito sa insertion, kung saan sila nakaduktong din, medyo mas maraming movement na kayang i-produce dito sa area na to. These next segments of our discussion would be a bit more important if you belong to my laboratory classes. So ito na po yung part ng discussion natin kung saan medyo mas magiging mindful na po tayo or sisimulan na nating aralin yung specific muscles and names nila, no, where we could find them all throughout the body. This next slide right here shows us the different muscles that we may find if we were to look at the back view of a person. Again, if you belong to my laboratory classes, ayan po, please remember, no, the different muscles that could be found on our face. So these are the muscles that are responsible for our facial expressions and mastication, which in other terms is referred to as chewing. Let's now talk about thoracic muscles or the types of muscles that could be found within the vicinity of the rib cage, right? So first up are the external intercostals. They elevate the ribs for inspiration or otherwise referred to as inhalation. Next, internal intercostals. Ito naman po yung mga muscles na magtatrabaho during forced or sinasadya or intentional expiration or yung pag-exhale natin. Alright? So, kung halimbawa tayo po ay magbubuntong hininga, no? It's the internal intercostals that would do that job. Next, diaphragm. This one is the muscle that would move during quiet breathing. So this slide right here shows us the specific locations of our external, internal intercostals, and the diaphragm. Next, we're done with the head and face. We're done with the thoracic muscles. Let's now proceed to the abdominal wall muscles. So dito naman po, ang mga kailangan nating tandaan is kung nasan sila located and kung ano yung ginagawa nila. So first up is the rectus abdominis. It's located at the center, alright? Nasa midline or nasa gitna daw po ng abdomen. So this has the capability to compress the abdomen. Next is the external abdominal oblique muscles. So although parehas sila ng pakinabang ng rectus abdominis, magkaiba sila ng location. So the external abdominal oblique is located at the sides of the abdomen. This slide right here shows us the anterior view of the muscles on our abdomen. Let's now talk about the upper scapular and upper limb muscles. First up is the trapezius. So these ones could be found near the shoulders at the upper back, and it could also extend the neck and the head. Alright, ulitin natin, no? The trapezius is usually found at the shoulder area and has the capability to extend the neck and the head. Next, the pectoralis major is found at the chest area and has the capability to elevate the ribs. So, nagtatrabaho or kumikilos din daw po ang pectoralis major during breathing, or ayun nga po, it could also elevate or raise up the ribs when we inhale. This slide, focus po tayo sa deltoid. This could also be found along the shoulder area. Alright, so for this slide, ayan po, let's be mindful, kung tinitignan natin is the posterior views or the anterior views. Kasi there may be muscles that we can see and we can identify sa mga anterior view na hindi natin makikita sa posterior view. And vice versa, may mga muscles na sa posterior view lang natin makikita pero wala sa anterior. So ayun po, be mindful of the orientation of the person or the diagram that we are looking at before we attempt to study or remember the labels or parts or muscles that would be seen here. Next are the triceps and biceps. So yung triceps po, it has 3 heads or 3 upper portions, and it has the capability to extend the elbow. Yung biceps naman po, this is also referred to as the flexing muscle. It also has the capability to flex or to move both the elbows and the shoulder. Alright, so ayan po. Dito, wag kakalimutan yung mga functions nila. The brachialis also could move or flex the elbow. The latissimus dorsi is found at the upper or lower back. Sorry, ulitin natin. Latissimus dorsi, lower back. And this one has the capability to also extend the shoulder. Shown here are all the structures that we've talked about in the previous slides. Listed here are all the forearm muscles. So dito po, it's literally just enumeration. Okay? Kailangan lang nating matandaan na sa forearms, ito lahat ng muscles that we may be able to find at our forearms. And right here, we see all of those muscles that was listed on the previous slide. Again, mag-iingat po, kung ang tinitingnan natin ay our anterior view or posterior view. Alright, next are the muscles of the hips and thighs. So the iliopsoas has the capability to move the hips. Next is the gluteus maximus. This could be found at the buttocks or yung butt area. Next is the gluteus medius. Alright, gluteus medius, it has the capability to rotate the thigh. Alright, so ayan po, again, itong dalawang to, yung iliopsoas and gluteus medius, these ones, no, could be found at the hips. Next on this slide, nakalista po dito yung mga muscles ng upper leg. Alright, now if you've noticed, no, dito sa mga dinadaanan na natin na slides, wala na tayong masyadong ma-explain, rather more on memorization na lang po ito. So dito kailangan na lang natin tandaan yung location nila and yung function nila. Next is the gracilis. It adducts the thigh and flexes the knee. So the gracilis daw po, it has the capability to move the thigh and flex the knee. Next, biceps femoris, semimembranous, and semitendinosus. These three structures, no, they would create the hamstring. Okay, so ulitin po natin, no, the hamstring is made up of three different structures: the biceps femoris, semimembranous, and semitendinosus. Next, let's look at these three right here: the vastus lateralis, medialis, and intermedius. These are three different muscles, pero iisa lang yung kaya nilang gawin, and it has the capability to extend the knee. Okay? So ulitin po natin: vastus lateralis, vastus medialis, and vastus intermedius. All of them could extend the knee. Shown here are all the muscles of the thigh and all of those structures that we've mentioned on the previous slides. And again, dito po ang kailangan lang natin tandaan is saan located ang mga muscles na to and what do they do. So next is the tibialis anterior. It could invert the foot. The gastrocnemius is specifically known as the calf muscle. It has the capability to move the foot and the leg. And third one is the soleus. So it could also flex the foot. Again, as usual, this slide right here shows us all these structures that was previously mentioned. That ends our discussion on the muscular system. I am Aurel Enriquez. Thank you so much for listening.